The knock on my door came at 7 in the morning during the worst blizzard Montana had seen in 15 years, and I knew whoever was standing on my porch was either desperate or completely insane. I shuffled to the front door of my farmhouse in my thermal socks, coffee mug in hand, squinting through the frosted glass at a figure bundled in so many layers she looked like a walking snowman. When I cracked open the door, a gust of wind nearly ripped it from my hands, and snow swirled into my entryway like angry spirits. "Can I help you?" I shouted over the howling wind. The woman pushed back her fur-lined hood, revealing a face pinched tight with cold and what I would soon learn was permanent irritation. She was maybe 50, with blonde highlights that screamed expensive salon, and her makeup was somehow still perfect despite the sub-zero temperatures. "Are you Ethan Iverson?" she demanded, not even apologizing for the intrusion. "That's me." "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Whispering Pines HOA. She thrust a clipboard at me, the papers flapping wildly in the wind. "I need you to sign these documents immediately." I stared at her like she had grown a second head. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not part of any HOA." "That's the problem," she snapped, her voice shrill enough to cut through the storm. "You need to be. The entire Whispering Pines development is part of our association, and your property is within our boundaries." I had lived on this 100-acre farm outside Kalispell, Montana, for 3 years. I had inherited it from my grandfather, who had owned it since the 1960s. The idea that I suddenly needed to join some homeowners association was absurd. "My property has been in my family for over 60 years, I said firmly. "There's no HOA here. You've got the wrong address." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Iverson, the Whispering Pines development was completed 2 years ago. Your property is surrounded by our community. According to our bylaws, any property within the development boundaries must comply with HOA regulations." "I think you need to leave now," I said, starting to close the door. She jammed her boot into the doorway. "If you don't sign these documents, we'll be forced to take legal action. We've already contacted our attorney." "Get off my property before I call the sheriff," I said, and I meant it. Patricia's face flushed red despite the cold. She yanked her boot back and stabbed a finger at me. "You'll be hearing from us, Mr. Iverson. Nobody defies this HOA." She turned and trudged back through the knee-deep snow to a white Escalade that was already half buried in a drift. I watched her struggle to get the door open, feeling zero sympathy, then closed my door and locked it. My black lab, Duke, padded over and pressed his nose against my hand. "Yeah, buddy," I muttered. "That was weird." I spent the rest of the day keeping the fire going and monitoring the storm. The power flickered twice but held. By evening, the snow had piled up nearly 4 feet in some places, transforming my familiar farm into an alien landscape of white drifts and ice covered everything. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. I was out before sunrise with the tractor, clearing the long driveway that connected my property to County Road 12. It took me 3 hours of back and forth, and I was just finishing up when I spotted a sheriff's deputy's SUV waiting at the end of my drive. I pulled up beside him and cut the engine. Deputy Martinez rolled down his window, and I could see the sympathy in his eyes before he even spoke. "Morning, Ethan. Carlos, what brings you out here?" He held up a manila envelope. "Got something for you. Legal papers." My stomach sank. "From the HOA. Patricia Henderson filed a complaint. Says you're in violation of some property agreement." He handed me the envelope through the window. "Look, between you and me, I think it's ridiculous, but I had to serve you." I took the papers, feeling the weight of them like lead. "Thanks for the heads up." "You might want to get a lawyer," Carlos said quietly. "Patricia's got a reputation. She's made life hell for half a dozen families in that development. Fines, liens, you name it. After he left, I sat in the cold tractor cab and opened the envelope. Inside was a lawsuit demanding I immediately join the Whispering Pines HOA, pay 3 years of back dues totaling $8,000, and comply with a list of violations that made my blood pressure spike. According to their complaint, my property was in violation of dozens of regulations. My barn was the wrong color. I had too many vehicles visible from the road. My fence didn't meet their standards. I had livestock, which was apparently prohibited. The list went on for 4 pages. I drove back to the house and immediately called my lawyer, Tom Brennan, who had handled my grandfather's estate. "They're claiming what?" Tom said after I read him the basics. "That my property is part of their HOA development." "Ethan, that's impossible. Your grandfather's property deed predates any development in that area by decades. Let me do some research and call you back." While I waited, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I fired up my computer and started searching for information about Whispering Pines. What I found made my jaw clench. The development had been built by Cascade Properties LLC starting in 2023. It consisted of 250 homes on half-acre lots, all clustered around a man-made lake and golf course. The houses were expensive, starting at $600,000, and marketed to wealthy retirees and professionals from places like Seattle and California who wanted Montana's beauty without the actual work of ranch life. The HOA bylaws were available on their website, and they were draconian. Monthly dues were $350. Homes had to be repainted every 5 years in approved colors only. No RVs, boats, or commercial vehicles could be visible from the street. Grass had to be maintained between 2 and 3 inches in height. Dogs over 40 pounds were prohibited. The restrictions went on for 23 pages. I looked out my window at my grandfather's barn, built in 1967, painted traditional barn red. At my 3 trucks parked by the shop. At Duke, who weighed 75 pounds. At the horses in the pasture and the chickens scratching around the coop. Everything about my property would violate their rules. Tom called back 2 hours later, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "Ethan, I found something interesting. I pulled the plat maps and deed records for both your property and the Whispering Pines development. And your property has a private road easement that was established in 1968. It grants you permanent access from County Road 12 across what is now part of the Whispering Pines development." "Okay, but how does that help me?" "Because according to the maps, the easement is 40 feet wide and runs right through the middle of their development. Not along the edge, Ethan. Through the middle. It cuts across their main boulevard, through their fancy entrance with the stone pillars, past the clubhouse, and directly across the golf course." I sat down hard. "You're kidding." "I'm not, and here's the kicker. The easement grants you not just access, but also utilities access and the right to maintain the roadway. When Cascade Properties developed the land, they either didn't do proper title research, or they gambled that you'd never notice or care." "But I don't use that easement," I said. "I access my property from the north." "Doesn't matter. You have the legal right to use it. In fact, you have the right to grade it, pave it, put up signs, and maintain it however you see fit, as long as it remains a functional roadway." My mind was racing. "So they built their entire fancy development on top of my easement." "Exactly. And they're trying to force you into their HOA. Ethan, you've got leverage here. Serious leverage." We talked for another 20 minutes, formulating a strategy. Tom would file a response to their lawsuit and countersue for harassment and attempted extortion. But more importantly, He would send them a formal notice regarding the easement and my intention to exercise my rights under it. "This is going to get ugly," Tom warned. "Are you sure you want to go this route?" I thought about Patricia Henderson showing up during a blizzard to threaten me, about the lawsuit demanding I pay them thousands of dollars and give up my rights to use my own property as I saw fit. "I'm sure," I said. 3 days later, I got another visit. This time it was a whole delegation. Patricia Henderson brought 2 other HOA board members, a skinny, nervous man named Derek and a heavy-set woman named Susan, plus their lawyer, a slick-looking guy in his 30s named Chad Warren. I met them on my porch. I didn't invite them in. "Mr. Iverson," Chad began, putting on a smile that probably worked well in court, "we'd like to discuss a resolution to this matter. I'm listening." Patricia couldn't help herself. "We're prepared to waive the back dues if you'll join the HOA immediately and bring your property into compliance within 90 days. "That's generous," I said flatly. "No," Chad's smile tightened. "Mr. Iverson, I don't think you understand your position here. We have a valid HOA with legally binding bylaws. Your property falls within our boundaries. Actually, I think you're the ones who don't understand your position." I pulled out a folded document from my pocket. "This is a copy of the easement that was recorded in 1968. It grants me permanent access across your development." I watched the color drain from Chad's face as he scanned the paper. Patricia snatched it from him. "This is fake," she declared. "It's a certified copy from the county recorder's office," I said calmly. "You're welcome to verify it." "So what?" Susan spoke up for the first time. "You don't even use that access." "That's about to change," I said. "I've decided to exercise my easement rights. Starting next week, I'll be upgrading the roadway. Should take about a month. There'll be some disruption to your neighborhood, but I'm sure you'll understand." Patricia's face went purple. "You can't do that." "I can and I will, unless we can come to an understanding." "Are you threatening us?" Chad demanded. "I'm explaining reality," I said. "You built a development on top of my easement. You want me to join your HOA and follow your rules. Fine. Then you need to buy that easement from me. Fair market value, professionally appraised, and drop the lawsuit." "This is extortion," Patricia shrieked. "No, this is property law. You should have done better title research before breaking ground. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." I went back inside and watched through the window as they huddled in the driveway, arguing. Patricia was gesturing wildly, her face still that alarming shade of purple. Finally, they left. Tom called me that evening, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "What happened?" I asked. "I just got off the phone with Chad Warren. He verified the easement and now he's freaking out. Apparently, Patricia never mentioned it to him. He had no idea." "So what did he say?" "He asked if you were serious about exercising your rights." "What did you tell him?" "That you absolutely are. In fact, I told him you're meeting with a contractor next week to get quotes for road improvements. Which, by the way, you should probably actually do." I grinned. "Already scheduled." The contractor, a guy named Mike I had worked with before, came out 2 days later. I showed him the easement map and explained the situation. His eyes got wider with every word. "You want me to give you a quote for upgrading a road that goes through a fancy HOA development? Just for grading and graveling. Nothing too disruptive. But I need it to be a legitimate quote for legitimate work." Mike walked the easement path with me. It was currently a paved road called Whispering Pines Boulevard, the main artery through the development. Their expensive homes lined both sides, with perfectly manicured lawns and elaborate landscaping. "If we did the work properly," Mike said, "we'd need to tear up about 100 yards of their existing pavement to get down to proper substrate. Then regrade and add drainage. Then gravel. It would block this entire street for weeks. How much would that cost? For 40 feet wide and a quarter-mile long, probably 80,000, plus traffic control, permits, all that. Write it up. 3 days later, I had a formal quote and a projected timeline. I sent copies to the HOA board, their lawyer, and the county planning department, along with an application for a right-of-way work permit. The response was immediate. Patricia showed up at my door the next morning, this time with her husband in tow. He was a tall, silver-haired man who looked exhausted. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, "what can I do for you? You're destroying property values," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "Do you understand that? Our homes are worth over $600,000 each. If you tear up our main street, values will plummet." "Then I guess you should have thought about that before you sued me," her husband stepped forward. "Mr. Iverson, I'm Robert Henderson. Please, can we discuss this rationally?" He seemed reasonable, so I nodded. "I'm willing to listen." "Patricia has been under a lot of stress," he began, shooting his wife a warning look when she started to protest. "The HOA has been dealing with some compliance issues, and she may have overreacted regarding your property." "May have," I said. "Did," he corrected, giving his wife a hard stare. "She made a mistake. We're here to make this right." "I'm listening." Patricia looked like she was swallowing glass, but Robert pressed on. "What would it take for you to agree not to exercise your easement, drop the lawsuit? In writing. Acknowledge that my property is not and has never been part of the Whispering Pines HOA. Agree that I'm exempt from all current and future HOA regulations, and pay my legal fees." "That's outrageous," Patricia burst out. "That's the deal," I said firmly. "Take it or leave it." Robert put a hand on his wife's arm. "We'll need to discuss this with the board." "You have 48 hours, I said. "After that, the contractor starts work." They left, Patricia muttering threats under her breath the whole way to their car. That night, I got a call from Tom. "They're digging in," he said. "Chad Warren called. He's threatening to fight the work permit." "On what grounds?" "He's claiming the easement is abandoned, says because you haven't used it in decades, you've lost the right to it." I felt a chill. "Can he do that?" "He can try." Easement abandonment is tricky, but there's case law that says non-use alone isn't enough. You'd have to have taken some affirmative action showing intent to abandon it. "Have you ever signed anything regarding that easement?" "Never. I didn't even know about it until you told me." "Then we should be fine, but it'll mean a court fight." "Let them fight. I'm not backing down." The next morning, I woke up to find my driveway blocked. Someone had parked 2 cars across the entrance, completely preventing me from leaving my property. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Martinez showed up within 30 minutes. "Let me guess," he said, looking at the vehicles. "HOA related? Got to be." He ran the plates. Both cars were registered to residents of Whispering Pines. He called for a tow truck and took photos of everything. "This is getting out of hand," Carlos said. "You want to file charges?" "Not yet, but document everything." The cars were towed, but that afternoon my mailbox was smashed. The next day, someone dumped trash along my fence line. The day after that, I found nails scattered across my driveway. I installed security cameras. The footage showed Patricia Henderson herself scattering the nails at 2 in the morning. I had her dead to rights. I called Tom immediately. "We're filing charges." "Are you sure? This could get really messy." "She's vandalizing my property and trying to intimidate me. I'm done playing nice." Tom contacted the sheriff's office. With the video evidence, they didn't hesitate. Deputy Martinez went to Patricia's house that evening and arrested her for criminal mischief and trespassing. The HOA exploded. Within hours, I had angry residents showing up at my gate, shouting about how I was persecuting their HOA president. Someone called the local news. A reporter showed up asking for interviews. I declined to speak to the press, but Tom didn't. He laid out the whole situation, explaining how the HOA had tried to force me to join, had sued me, and had escalated to vandalism when I refused. He showed the reporter the easement documents. The story aired that night, and suddenly public opinion shifted. The comments on the news station's website were overwhelmingly in my favor. People were outraged that an HOA would try to force someone to join and then vandalize their property. Patricia made bail and immediately went to her own lawyer. Chad Warren scheduled an emergency meeting with Tom. "They want to settle," Tom told me after the meeting. "What are they offering?" "Everything you asked for, plus $5,000 for damages and emotional distress." "I want more. Ethan, this is a good deal. They vandalized my property and had me blocked in. Patricia Henderson committed crimes. I want her to resign from the HOA board permanently, and I want it in writing that if any HOA member harasses me in the future, they'll pay a $10,000 fine directly to me." Tom whistled. "That's aggressive." "So is scattering nails on my driveway at 2 in the morning." He went back to negotiate. It took 3 days of back and forth, but finally they agreed. Patricia would resign immediately. The HOA would pay $15,000 for damages and legal fees. I would be permanently exempt from all HOA jurisdiction, and there would be a $10,000 penalty clause for any future harassment. The papers were signed in Tom's office. Patricia showed up looking like she had aged 10 years. She wouldn't make eye contact with me. "Mrs. Henderson," I said as we were leaving. She paused, her hand on the door. "What, you brought this on yourself? All you had to do was check the property records before you tried to bully me." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't say anything. She just walked out. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, the Flathead County Prosecutor's Office called. Patricia was being charged with criminal mischief and stalking. The stalking charge came from the pattern of harassment, the repeated visits to my property, and the vandalism. "We'd like you to testify at the trial," the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Mills, told me. "Absolutely." The trial was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, life returned to something like normal. I worked the farm, took care of the animals, and tried to forget about HOA drama. But Whispering Pines wasn't done with me. Robert Henderson called me one evening. "Mr. Iverson, I need to ask you a favor." "What kind of favor?" "Patricia's facing jail time. Her lawyer says with the video evidence and the pattern of behavior, she could get 6 months. Please, is there any way you could ask the prosecutor to reduce the charges?" "Why would I do that?" "Because she's sick. She's been diagnosed with early onset dementia. That's why her behavior has been so erratic. She's not herself." I felt a twinge of sympathy, but I pushed it down. She knew what she was doing when she scattered those nails. She drove to my property in the middle of the night with intent to damage my vehicles. I know, and I'm not excusing it, but please consider that she's not well. This isn't who she really is. "I'll think about it," I said and hung up. I did think about it. I thought about how she had showed up during a blizzard to threaten me, how she had tried to sue me for $8,000, how she had led a campaign of harassment and vandalism. But I also thought about how she had looked in the lawyer's office, diminished and broken. I called Jennifer Mills. "I'm willing to support a plea deal if she does community service and gets psychiatric treatment," I said. "But I want her banned from any HOA position for life, and that needs to be part of the court order." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "That's more generous than I expected. I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it so I can sleep at night." The plea deal went through. Patricia pled guilty to criminal mischief, got a suspended sentence, 200 hours of community service, mandatory psychiatric treatment, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Montana. At the sentencing hearing, she stood up and addressed the court. "I want to apologize to Mr. Iverson," she said, her voice small. "I was wrong. I let my position go to my head and I became someone I'm not proud of. I'm grateful for his mercy and I hope someday to make amends." She looked at me then and I saw real remorse in her eyes. I nodded slightly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. After the hearing, Robert Henderson approached me in the courthouse hallway. "Thank you," he said, offering his hand. "You didn't have to do that." I shook his hand. "I hope she gets the help she needs." "She will. And I want you to know I'm taking over as interim HOA president. I'm going to make some changes, a lot of changes. Good luck with that." He smiled tiredly. "I'll need it. Half the board is furious that Patricia resigned. They think you railroaded her. That's their problem, not mine." "Fair enough. But I want to extend an olive branch. We're having a community meeting next month to discuss revising the HOA bylaws. Would you be willing to come speak about property rights and the importance of due diligence?" I stared at him. "You want me to speak to your HOA?" "I want them to understand what happened and why, so it never happens again." I considered it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Whispering Pines ever again, but another part of me thought about all the other property owners out there who might face similar situations. "I'll do it," I said. "But I'm not pulling punches. I wouldn't expect you to." The community meeting was held on a Thursday evening in early April. The Whispering Pines clubhouse was packed. At least 100 people crammed into the space, and I could feel the hostility radiating off many of them as I walked to the front. Robert introduced me, giving a brief overview of what had happened. Then he handed me the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces. Some were curious, some angry, some sympathetic. "I'm not here to make friends," I began. "I'm here to tell you what happened and hopefully prevent it from happening to someone else." I laid it all out. How Patricia had shown up during a blizzard demanding I join the HOA. How she had filed a frivolous lawsuit. How the HOA had failed to do basic title research before developing the land. How my easement gave me rights that could have shut down their main street for months. "Property rights matter," I said. "You can't just decide someone is part of your HOA because it's convenient. You can't threaten and harass people into compliance. And you sure as hell can't vandalize someone's property because they refuse to bow to your authority." A woman in the front row raised her hand. "But our property values are affected by what our neighbors do. Don't we have a right to protect our investments?" "Sure," I said. "But that right ends where someone else's property begins. If you wanted absolute control over the area, you should have bought all the land. You didn't. My family owned that land long before your development existed, and we have rights too." A man in the back shouted, "So we're just supposed to let you do whatever you want? Paint your house neon pink? Fill your yard with junk?" "That's not what I said." "But if you want compliance from neighbors, you negotiate. You treat them with respect. You don't lead with lawsuits and threats." The meeting went on for 2 hours. Some people got it. Others remained convinced I was the villain. But by the end, I felt like I had said what needed to be said. Robert walked me out afterward. "That went better than I expected," he said. "Half of them still hate me. Only half, I'll take it." He paused at my truck. "Seriously though, thank you. We needed to hear that. Are you really going to change the bylaws?" "I'm going to try. Make them less restrictive, more reasonable. Focus on real issues, not nitpicking about grass height and fence colors." "Good luck, you'll need it," he laughed. "Yeah, I know." As I drove home, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Finally, really over. But life had one more surprise for me. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter from Cascade Properties, LLC. They wanted to buy my easement. They were offering $350,000. I called Tom immediately. "Is this for real? Let me look into it," he said. He called back an hour later. "It's legitimate. Cascade's lawyers finally figured out the liability they're sitting on. Your easement is a cloud on the title of every property in that development. It affects their ability to get mortgages, sell homes, everything. They want it gone." 350,000 seems high. It's not. Professional appraisers would probably value it higher. That easement gives you the right to put in utilities, maintain roads, and access your property right through the heart of their most expensive neighborhood. It's a nightmare for them. What do you think I should do? That's up to you. But if you sell, make sure they throw in a permanent guarantee that you'll never be subject to HOA jurisdiction, even if the laws change. I thought about it for a week. $350,000 was life-changing money. I could pay off the farm completely, upgrade equipment, maybe even take a vacation for the first time in 5 years. But part of me wanted to hold onto the easement out of spite. A permanent reminder to Whispering Pines that they didn't control everything. In the end, practicality won out. I negotiated the price up to $400,000, got the permanent HOA exemption in writing, and signed the papers. The money hit my account on a Tuesday in May. I sat in my truck, looking at the balance on my phone, and felt surreal. A year ago, I was a struggling farmer trying to make ends meet. Now I was debt-free with money in the bank, all because an HOA president had been too arrogant to do proper research. I used some of the money to upgrade the farm. New roof on the barn, new fencing, a proper irrigation system. I donated $10,000 to the local food bank. I bought Duke a ridiculously expensive dog bed that he ignored in favor of sleeping on my regular bed. And I set up a legal fund through Tom's office to help property owners who were dealing with HOA disputes. I wanted other people to have the resources to fight back when they needed to. The first person to use the fund was a young couple in Missoula who were being fined by their HOA for having a vegetable garden in their front yard. The HOA claimed it violated aesthetic standards. Tom helped them fight it, and they won. The second was an elderly veteran in Bozeman whose HOA was trying to make him remove his flagpole. The HOA said it exceeded the height restrictions. Tom pointed out that the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act protected the veteran's right. The HOA backed down. Word spread. Soon Tom was fielding calls from people all over Montana dealing with HOA overreach. Some cases were legitimate disputes. Others were clear-cut harassment. The fund helped even the playing field. 6 months after everything settled, I ran into Robert Henderson at the feed store in Kalispell. He looked good, more relaxed than the last time I had seen him. "Ethan," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "How have you been? Can't complain, you?" "Better. I got the bylaws revised. Took 3 months and more meetings than I can count, but we did it. Cut the restrictions by about 60%, lowered the dues, and established an appeals process for violations." "That's great. How'd Patricia take it?" His expression sobered. "She's doing okay. The treatment's helping. She's volunteering at a senior center now, helping other people with dementia. Says it gives her perspective. Good for her. She asks about you sometimes, wants to know if you're doing all right." I didn't know what to say to that. Finally, I settled on, "Tell her I'm fine. And I hope she continues to improve." "I will." He hefted a bag of chicken feed onto his cart. "You know, what happened with you taught me a lot. About power and responsibility, and how easy it is to lose sight of what matters when you're caught up in rules and regulations." "Heavy stuff for a Thursday morning," he laughed. "Yeah, I guess so. But seriously, thank you for standing your ground and for showing mercy. Both mattered. After he left, I finished my shopping and drove home. The Montana sky was impossibly blue, the mountains sharp and clear in the spring air. Duke greeted me at the door like I had been gone for years instead of an hour. I unloaded the feed, checked on the horses, collected eggs from the chickens, and made myself lunch. Normal, everyday tasks. Exactly the life I wanted. That evening, I sat on my porch with a beer and watched the sun set over the mountains. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Another HOA case just came in. Lady in Whitefish being fined for having a little free library in her yard. Want me to take it? I smiled and texted back. Take it. Send me the details. Because that was the thing about standing up to bullies. It wasn't just about winning your own fight. It was about making it easier for the next person to stand up too. The spring turned to summer, and life on the farm settled into its rhythms. I hired a part-time hand, a kid named Jake from town who needed work and didn't mind early mornings. We got the hay in without any drama, fixed the irrigation lines, and repainted the barn the same barn red it had always been. In July, the Flathead Courier ran a feature story about the HOA legal fund. The reporter interviewed me, Tom, and 3 people who had been helped by the fund. The article went viral locally, and suddenly, I was getting calls from newspapers and radio stations wanting to talk about property rights and HOA reform. I did a few interviews, then stopped. I wasn't looking to be a crusader or a public figure. I just wanted to farm and live my life in peace. But the fund kept growing. People sent donations. A retired judge contributed $5,000. A property rights advocacy group matched every donation up to $25,000. By the end of summer, the fund had over $100,000, and Tom had taken on 12 cases. He won 11 of them. The 12th was still pending. In August, I got invited to speak at a property law conference in Helena. I almost declined, but Tom convinced me to do it. These are lawyers, judges, and legislators, he said. People who can actually change the laws to prevent this kind of thing. You should speak. So I drove to Helena and gave a 20-minute talk about my experience. I kept it factual, focusing on the legal issues rather than the personal drama. When I finished, I got a standing ovation. Afterward, a state legislator approached me. Her name was Senator Karen Schultz, and she represented a district in western Montana. Mr. Iverson, I found your story fascinating and deeply troubling. I'd like to introduce legislation to reform HOA practices in Montana. Would you be willing to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee? What kind of reforms are you talking about? Requiring HOAs to do comprehensive title searches before claiming jurisdiction over any property. Establishing clear penalties for harassment and frivolous lawsuits. Creating an oversight board to hear appeals from homeowners. Limiting HOA authority over pre-existing properties. It sounded almost too good to be true. When do you need me to testify? The session starts in January. I'll be in touch. We exchanged contact information, and I drove home feeling like maybe, just maybe, something good would come from all the chaos Patricia Henderson had put me through. Fall arrived with its usual glory, the aspens turning gold and the air taking on that crisp, apple-sharp quality that makes Montana autumns famous. I spent my days cutting firewood, winterizing equipment, and preparing for the long, cold months ahead. The legal fund had grown to nearly $200,000, and Tom had hired an associate lawyer specifically to handle HOA cases. Together, they were fighting battles across the state, pushing back against everything from unreasonable fines to foreclosures over unpaid dues. In October, I got an unexpected visit. A CNN producer wanted to do a segment on HOA reform, and they wanted me to be part of it. It would be a 5-minute piece, the producer said over the phone. We'd film at your farm, show the Whispering Pines development, interview you and some of the people the legal fund has helped. It would bring national attention to the issue. I talked it over with Tom. What do you think? I think it could help a lot of people, he said carefully. But it'll also put a target on your back. There are a lot of HOAs out there, and a lot of them won't appreciate the negative attention. Let them come. The CNN crew arrived in early November. They spent 2 days filming, interviewing me, Tom, the legal fund recipients, and even Robert Henderson, who spoke candidly about the mistakes Whispering Pines had made. The only person they couldn't interview was Patricia. Her lawyer advised against it, citing her ongoing medical treatment. The segment aired 3 weeks later during prime time. My phone started ringing before it even finished. Journalists, lawyers, other people dealing with HOA problems. Tom's office was swamped with calls. The piece went viral online. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed over 2 million times. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive, with thousands of people sharing their own HOA horror stories. But there was backlash too. The Community Associations Institute, a national HOA lobbying group, issued a statement condemning the piece as one-sided and inflammatory. They claimed HOAs were essential for maintaining property values and community standards. Senator Schultz called me the day after the segment aired. Perfect timing, she said. I was already getting support for the reform bill, but now I've got legislators from both parties asking to co-sponsor. We're going to make this happen. True to her word, she introduced the Montana Homeowners Protection Act in January. I drove to Helena to testify at the committee hearing. The hearing room was packed. HOA representatives filled one side, property rights advocates the other. I was one of 6 people scheduled to testify. When my turn came, I walked to the witness table and laid out my story one more time. But this time, I focused on the legal gaps that had allowed the situation to escalate. No one should have to spend thousands of dollars in legal fees to defend property rights that should have been clear from the start, I said. No one should face harassment and vandalism because they refuse to surrender their rights. And no one should have their home foreclosed on because an HOA board decided they didn't like the color of their mailbox. I looked directly at the legislators. This bill won't end HOAs. It won't even prevent them from enforcing reasonable rules. What it will do is establish clear boundaries, protect property owners from overreach, and ensure due process. That's not radical. That's common sense. The HOA representatives testified next, arguing that the bill would hamstring their ability to maintain communities and protect property values. But their arguments rang hollow after the stories the committee had heard. The bill passed out of committee unanimously. It went to the full Senate a week later and passed 47-3. The House took it up in February and passed it 68-32. The governor signed it in March. Montana became the first state in the nation with comprehensive HOA reform legislation. Senator Schultz called me the day the governor signed it. "We did it, Ethan. This is because of you." "It's because of everyone who spoke up," I said. "I just got the ball rolling." "You did more than that. You stood your ground when it would have been easier to give in. You gave other people the courage to do the same." After I hung up, I walked outside and stood in my yard, looking across my property. Duke ran circles around me, delighted by the spring sunshine. The horses grazed peacefully in the pasture. The chickens scratched and clucked in their run. This was what mattered. Not laws or lawsuits or CNN segments, just this simple, hard-earned peace. But I wasn't naive. I knew the fight wasn't over. The Community Associations Institute had already announced they were challenging the Montana law in court. Other states were watching to see what happened. Property rights battles were being fought in every corner of the country. The legal fund, now over $300,000, would keep fighting. Tom and his associate would keep taking cases. Senator Schultz was already working with legislators in other states to introduce similar reforms. And me. I was going back to farming. In April, I got one final letter from Whispering Pines. It was from Robert Henderson, but it wasn't on HOA letterhead. It was a personal note. Dear Ethan, it read, I wanted you to know that I'm stepping down as HOA president. The bylaws have been revised, the culture has changed, and it's time for someone else to take the lead. Patricia is doing well. Her treatment has helped significantly, and she's found peace in volunteer work. She asked me to tell you that she thinks of you often and hopes you found happiness. As for me, I've learned more in the past year about leadership, humility, and grace than in the previous 20 years combined. Thank you for that education, even though it came at significant cost to both our families. If you're ever in the area, stop by for coffee. I promise no HOA business will be discussed. Sincerely, Robert. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Maybe someday I'd take him up on that coffee. Maybe not. But I appreciated the gesture. Spring turned to summer and the cycle continued. I worked the farm, helped with the legal fund, and occasionally did media interviews when particularly egregious HOA cases made the news. In June, I hired a young woman named Emma Robertson as a full-time farmhand. She was fresh out of Montana State with a degree in agricultural science and a passion for sustainable farming. She had ideas about crop rotation and pasture management that were way beyond my knowledge, and she wasn't afraid to speak up. Your south pasture is overgrazed, she said on her third day. We need to rotate the horses out and let it recover. Yes, madam, I said, grinning. Duke had taken an immediate liking to her, which was the best recommendation anyone could get. With Emma handling day-to-day operations, I had time to focus on longer-term planning. I started researching organic certification, looking into whether it made sense for the farm. I met with the county extension agent about diversifying crops. I even took a weekend class on farm business management. The farm was thriving. I was thriving. And every time I drove past the Whispering Pines entrance with its fancy stone pillars, I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that I had stood my ground and won. In August, I got a call from a filmmaker who wanted to make a documentary about HOA reform, using my story as the centerpiece. I declined. I had said everything I needed to say, and I was ready to step back and let others carry the torch. Tom understood. You've earned your piece, he said. Let someone else be the public face for a while. The legal fund was being managed by a board now, with Tom as chairman. They had helped over 50 families across Montana and were fielding inquiries from other states. The fund had become something bigger than I ever imagined, a real force for change, and me. I was just a farmer again, which was all I had ever wanted to be. On a cool September evening, I sat on my porch with Duke at my feet and a beer in my hand, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Emma was in the barn, finishing evening chores. The horses were settled for the night. The chickens were roosting. Everything was exactly as it should be. My phone buzzed. A text from Tom. Just won another case. HOA in Great Falls tried to foreclose on a veteran for flying a POW MIA flag. Judge ruled in our favor and fined the HOA $25,000 for violation of the new law. Thought you'd want to know. I smiled and texted back. Good work. Then I turned off my phone and just sat there, breathing in the cool mountain air, listening to the distant sound of a coyote howling somewhere up in the hills. A year and a half ago, Patricia Henderson had shown up during a blizzard and tried to force me into her HOA. She had threatened, sued, harassed, and vandalized. She had thought her position gave her power over me. She had been wrong, not because I was stronger or smarter or richer, but because I knew my rights and I refused to be bullied. Because I had good people like Tom in my corner. Because I was willing to fight when fighting mattered. And in the end, that fight had changed not just my life, but the lives of hundreds of other people across Montana. It had exposed the problems with unchecked HOA authority. It had led to real legislative reform. It had created resources for people who needed help fighting back. All because one arrogant HOA president hadn't bothered to check the property records before she tried to expand her little empire. I raised my beer to the mountains, to the sunset, to the journey that had brought me here. To property rights, I said aloud. Duke's tail thumped against the porch boards in agreement. The stars came out one by one as darkness fell, and I sat there until the cold drove me inside. I built a fire in the wood stove, made myself dinner, and settled in with a book. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding me that winter was coming again. But I was ready. The wood was stacked, the animals were healthy, the equipment was maintained, and the farm was paid off. I had everything I needed, and somewhere out there, other people were having their own battles with their own HOAs. Some would win, some would lose. But thanks to the fund, the new law, and the awareness that had been raised, more of them would have a fighting chance. That was worth all the stress, all the conflict, all the sleepless nights. I closed my book and looked around my small, warm living room. This house had been my grandfather's and his father's before that. 3 generations of my family had lived here, worked this land, and built their lives in the shadow of these mountains. No HOA was ever going to take that away, and if they tried, well, I had the lawyers, the law, and the determination to fight them every step of the way. But I hoped it wouldn't come to that. I hoped that the reforms we had fought for would prevent other people from going through what I had gone through. I hoped that HOAs would learn to respect property rights and treat their neighbors with decency rather than demands. Hope was a powerful thing. I let Duke out one last time, watched him do his business and come bounding back, then locked up for the night. As I headed upstairs to bed, I paused at the window and looked out across my land, silver in the moonlight. This was mine. Not because some HOA said so, not because I paid dues or followed their rules, but because my family had owned it for generations, and I had fought to keep it. That was real power. Not the petty authority of an HOA board, but the solid, unshakable power of knowing your rights and standing your ground. I slept well that night and every night after. The story could have ended there, but life rarely wraps up that neatly. Over the following months, I continued to receive updates about the ripple effects of our fight. 3 more states introduced HOA reform legislation modeled on Montana's law. 2 of them passed. The Community Associations Institute's legal challenge to Montana's law failed in district court, and they chose not to appeal. Tom's HOA practice grew so much that he brought on 2 more associate attorneys. The legal fund distributed over $70,000 in aid to homeowners fighting unjust HOA actions. Patricia Henderson completed her community service and continued her volunteer work. According to Robert, she had found a sense of purpose helping others that she had never found in wielding HOA authority. And Whispering Pines. Under Robert's leadership and then his successors, it became something different. The revised bylaws focused on actual community building rather than enforcement. They organized neighborhood barbecues and volunteer projects. Property values stayed strong, but the atmosphere changed from one of fear to one of cooperation. As for me, I kept farming. Emma proved to be exceptional, and by the end of her first year, I made her a partner in the operation. She brought energy and innovation that the farm needed, and I brought experience and resources. Together we were building something sustainable and profitable. The documentary filmmaker eventually found someone else to feature, a woman in Arizona who was fighting her HOA over solar panels. I sent a donation to her legal fund and wished her well. Life moved on, as it always does. The drama faded into memory, becoming just another story to tell over beers at the local bar or coffee at the feed store. But the changes we had made, those were permanent. The law was on the books. The legal fund was established. The awareness had been raised. HOAs across Montana knew they couldn't act with impunity anymore, and that was the real victory. Not that I had won my personal battle, but that we had changed the system to make it harder for those battles to happen in the first place. On a cold December morning, almost 2 years after Patricia Henderson had knocked on my door during that blizzard, I stood in the same spot and looked out at fresh snow covering everything in white. Duke pressed against my legs, and I scratched his ears absently. "We did good, buddy," I said softly. "We did real good." He woofed in agreement, or maybe he just wanted breakfast. Either way, I smiled and went to start my day, because that's what you do. You face the challenges, you fight the battles, you stand your ground. And then you move on and live your life. The farm was waiting. The animals needed care. Emma would be here soon to help with morning chores. There was work to do, always work to do, but it was good work, honest work, done on my own land according to my own rules. And nobody, not Patricia Henderson, not any HOA, not anyone, could ever take that away from me again. I had made sure of it.